Well, I know that we are all busy with our congested schedules, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm delighted to see those of you who could join us for today's Mineta Transportation Institute Research Snap webinar. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. We lead two competitively selected consortia. The first is the Mineta Consortium for Transportation Mobility, funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the second is the California State University Transportation Consortium, funded by the California Road Repair and Recovery Act of 2017. Across all of our work, we would focus on improving the mobility of people and goods. And given last week's news regarding TSA's forthcoming cybersecurity mandates on major rail and subway systems, coupled with the fact that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we wanted to deliver this timely webinar today, where our research will be talking about aligning the transit industry and vendors to address increasing cybersecurity challenges. This is such a critically important topic and one we can all benefit from learning more from. During today's webinar, if you have questions, I invite you to place them in the chat or in the Q&A feature. At the end of today's program and later in the afternoon, we will be distributing a link for those who would like to rewatch it or learn more. So today's presentation will focus on research to help public transit agencies understand the cybersecurity risk posed by the role some vendors play in their systems and align vendors' interests with the agencies to better understand, mitigate, and respond to threats. To learn more about their study findings, today we'll hear from MTI Research Associates, Mr. Brandon Thomas, an entrepreneur and executive with over 20 years of experience developing and managing businesses in numerous industries. He has a passion for disruption and has found himself at the center of many technological shifts in recent decades, from the rise of data in politics to the ubiquitous nature of social media. Brandon is currently working in the transit space with an interest in understanding and supporting the evolution of mobility. Joining Brandon, we have Catherine Seckman, Executive Director of Strategy and Analysis at the Gray Line Group, specializing in bringing best practices of the intel sector to global business. She is a Fulbright Scholar, holds a master's in security studies from Georgetown University and a bachelor's in international relations, from Drake University. Thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to join us today. I am going to just give you the floor and say go for it. We can't wait to hear what you have. Please take it away.
Thank you, Karen. Great to be here. And thanks for that wonderful introduction. Katie and I are going to go through, we're going to kind of do a quick level set for those of you that may not have seen us before or heard about our work to date. And then Katie will kind of give the overview of what we're seeing in our the current research with regard to the supply chain to public transit. So just a level set for folks that may not have gotten into this yet, the arena of cybersecurity is quite broad. I think a lot of folks, when they first hear about it and start looking at it, they kind of fall into it being a technology problem. Well, the reality is it's much, much bigger than that. Technology certainly plays a role, but there are, of course, people and processes that play a large role as well in ensuring that your cyber risk posture is in the state that it should be in. Referring here to the NIST framework, if you haven't heard about this, this is kind of the bedrock for US cybersecurity policy. Basically, everything that is done, both internally, externally, public, and private, hangs off this NIST CSF, this NIST Cybersecurity Framework. As you'll notice, it includes the technically things. That's a fancy word for the bits in there. You know, in addition to those, though, there's the respond and recover. It's not just about detecting and understanding when intrusions are happening, but being ready to respond and recover. As you know, most often for most organizations, it's very much not a matter of if, but when breaches occur. So beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about why cybersecurity matters in public transit. we've had a lot of conversations, both related to our research and to our work outside of the research around technology and how the role, and basically the role technology plays within public transit. The reality is that the role of technology in public transit has been changing and changing quickly. And it's important for leadership, both of the agencies and the supply chain, to be observant of these changes and then also understand how their organization, how their strategies, how their operations also need to evolve. What generally happens when technology starts creeping into a space, you have the IT person who's been helping you get your computers on your desks and kind of doing the networking and the mechanics of technology within your organization. And usually, to be honest, they're in the basement. They're not at the strategic level of the organization. While as technology encroaches into the operation, it becomes not only necessary, but now with the cybersecurity implications, critical that there be technology counsel at the senior leadership team, whether that be at the CXO level, at the board level, and so forth. The other bit that we've noticed in a lot of our work is how organizations are very project focused. It's about deploying the thing and then the thing runs. Put the bus on the street and it goes. Buy the bus and it works. The reality, though, is with technology, those cycle times of being able to build, deploy, and run are becoming much, much shorter, where there's a lot more maintenance, a lot more effort needed to ensure that those systems are up to date. And cybersecurity is very much one of those realms. There's a concept of systems development lifecycle management. My guess is that that's a new idea to many of you on this call and fairly new to this industry, certainly at the executive and board level. However, that concept, it's what I've practiced much of my career working in software development. You'll also see SDLC noted in a lot of the NIST cybersecurity documentation into the sort of the frameworks and structures for how we think about cyber risk management. It's never a set it and forget it program. It's always a deliberate and intentional effort that takes time. And it's a life cycle. There's deploy, build, operate, maintain. And rather than in a sequence or in a linear, it's a circular thing that always has to be constantly flowing. We'll get into this a little bit more later as we talk about our current research. I did just want to note, so we did a study that was published last year on the current state of cybersecurity preparedness within the public transit agency. For most folks that we spoke with, it wasn't seen as startling. It was kind of understood, but we were able to actually put some numbers behind it and really put it in black and white, which has helped, to some extent within the industry, but also outside the industry. The Transportation Security Agency, Karen mentioned the directive that's coming down there. I know that there's a couple House subcommittees that are doing some panels in the next few weeks. Actually, we are testifying at the House Technology and Infrastructure Committee. So these sorts of, reference materials have helped not only the industry, but then outside the industry understand the current state. The big factor here is the risk is growing. Technology is increasingly playing a larger role in your operation, whether you like it or not. And with that increasing role, the risk of how those various facets might impact or add risk to your general operations is certainly under threat. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Katie, and she can talk about our current work.
All right, thank you, Brandon. So as noted, we're kind of picking up the ball and going to the next step here and really zeroing in on the supply chain and the vendors that are working with public transit. And so some key areas here that we're really focused on is, you'll see these 3 bullet points here with people safety, business continuity, and personal and financial data. Those are obviously not new to anyone's operations, but what we're really focused on is, okay, but what role does cybersecurity play in each of those areas? And in many cases, public transit agencies are relying on vendors vendors to help with things such as people safety. And this is where you see a lot of the intersection with cybersecurity. So previously, people safety, for example, would be making sure the operator was overseeing the bus, for example, driving safely, passenger safety, physical threats, that sort of thing, which are still very much a concern in the transit industry. But now you overlay what are some of the technological advancements that are playing a role in that. Well, for example, there's video surveillance. You look at business continuity, and it's making sure operations can continue to run. And on the IT side of the house, it's very much looking at yard management software that exists now, real-time schedule operations that both the agency and a lot of customers have really come to rely on. And then, of course, personal and financial data, which in the realm of cybersecurity, I think more people are familiar with the risk there of making sure that your personal information is protected. Well, in the transit space, there's employee data, there's also customer data, and there's a lot of new sources for that customer data, everything from geolocation to the traditional financial information, credit card information, that sort of thing. So we're seeing increasing advancement in technologies impacting these areas, which really moves into the importance of having some important discussions with vendors. And so this study that we're involved in right now is really centered on conducting a lot of interviews and discussions with the vendors working with these public transit agencies to learn a bit more about the details of their operations, how they interface with and deliver their services to public transit agencies, and what that looks like overall from a cyber risk management perspective. So Brandon, if you'll go to the next slide. Again, we're still wrapping up some of our interviews and finalizing some of our findings here, but we do have some kind of key learnings that we've taken away. The good news is, I'd say, public transit agencies can and should be turning to their vendors, turning to their supply chains, because in most cases, we're seeing the level of maturity amongst the supply chain is a bit more sophisticated than amongst some of the transit agencies. So they're an excellent resource. And there's the opportunity for more conversations to be had there. And that's something that we've heard from across the supply chain, of a willingness and an interest of working with public transit agencies to really help them better deliver their services, but then also helping to secure the transit agencies themselves.
Let me just add one little color there too. Sorry to interrupt, but when looking at the vendors in the supply chain, the ones that are working outside the industry, that are cross-pollinating, a large email provider, shall we say, or those vendors that are cross, that's where you're going to see the real value, because they are dealing with regulation, compliance, and standards and expectations in other industries that have dramatically impacted their efforts here. So just
payment processes being another example, fare management in transit, those services can be applied elsewhere. That's a good call out, Brandon.
And my dog's barking. So back to you, Katie.
So this is, and Brandon already touched on the second point, but really looking at OT, at the operational technologies that have existed for quite some time at public transit agencies, and really how the show is run on a daily basis. That includes, of course, safety and security systems, because the need for security in public transit is by no means new, and we recognize that. But if you look now at, and this is across our lives, but look at everything that's now enabled by the internet, everything that's connected. In your homes, it may be your AC and your heating system. It may be, some homes now have, your refrigerator might talk to you now to tell you that you need to buy milk, and it's going to add it to your shopping list, or it's going to order that for you already. Well, if you go back into public transit, that's very much at a simpler level, but it's showing up in public transit. We already mentioned fare payment, but it's throughout operations. And increasingly that's important for business efficiency. That's how you want to run your agency. It's how there's innovation. It's how you're delivering best services to your customers. And increasingly, it's what customers are coming to expect. But as more of these internet-enabled devices are added to your systems, you've got access points to these operational technologies that run your core operations that comes with additional exposure to external threats. And those are pathways into really disrupting operations. You'll see that with, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of the major headline ransomware incidents lately. And, individuals who are up to no good will find all different ways to get into systems. And a lot of these internet-enabled devices, unfortunately, are a way to do that. Now, that doesn't mean you lock everything down. There is the opportunity to secure that. And that's where everything that Brandon outlined in terms of the enterprise risk management, there's a lot of solutions out there is the bottom line. But it's being aware of what some of those risks are and what a lot of the integration of new technologies into your operations is doing to your risk matrix. A more specific example with our third point here is just, and Brandon alluded to this earlier too, with the systems development lifecycle mention, was that really, if you think about, you're purchasing a new bus or rail car, and that's a major investment. You want that to last for a while. We're talking 10, 15, 20 years. Well, that's not really what the life cycle for technology is today. I mean, we're lucky if it's a couple years. Anybody who uses a cell phone, you buy your new phone and it's practically obsolete in a couple of years. Well, you apply that in this industry, and that's a major problem from a security standpoint. It can't just be a one and done purchase. And so what we're finding in our conversations with the vendors is it becomes a conversation in terms of between the transit agency and the vendor of making sure that built into RFPs, built into contracts, is the opportunity and the budget allocation for a vendor to maintain those software updates, to provide firmware updates, to make sure that any technology that's present in that vehicle that's compatible with that vehicle is able to be updated on a regular basis. And this is likely not going to be just an annual update. Increasingly, just with the evolution of threats that exist, it needs to happen on a far more regular basis. So that's a bit of a renegotiation, I think, of how that dynamic has existed up to this point. So there's a lot to explore there as well. And Brandon, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that. I know want to make sure we leave time for questions. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard of some vendors that traditionally haven't been successful at getting their clients to pay for support contracts, which is how they've kind of articulated that need for those future firmware and software updates. And then we have some vendors that realize it's critical for them to successfully deliver a product to require that software update. So when looking at the RFP process, when balancing cost of one vendor to the other, those vendors that win out when they don't include those support necessities, that's a problem. They really shouldn't. It should be the vendor that is and knows that it's required in order to deliver a successful product over time, over the duration of the life of the contract, that software needs to also be included.
And it's in the vendor's interest to do so as well, from a reputational perspective, especially, and just the efficacy of the product.
Yeah.
So we do. I mean, we have some things. If we've piqued your interest here, we will be putting our new findings into a new report. Again, that is underway. But if you'd like to dive into anything in the interim, we do have a brief that was published on Buy America provisions and how those relate to public transit that has already been published. And you'll see the link there. And I think Alvarina has put that in the chat as well, if you're looking for that. We dive into PII, so the personally identifiable information, and how that links to cybersecurity. That's also going to be in a forthcoming brief. A lot of interesting work going on there, just in terms of the evolution of data privacy and what that looks like when you're in a public space. And then again, this paper will be out later this year. So
Paul, that is just incredibly important information. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And to the listeners, we did put chats into all of the different reports they've mentioned, as well as those reports that will be referenced in the November 4th testimony. Before I turn to the questions now, I would like to give a brief shout out to Ms. Amy Stearns, who is our grant manager in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Thank you for joining us, Amy. And thank you to Emeritus Trustee David Turney for also making time to tune in today. Let's take our first question from the Q&A feature, which I will read verbatim. Are ticketing vending machines at a particular cybersecurity risk? I understand some transit agencies are trying to move away from ticket vending machines because of equity-related issues. For example, not everyone carries a credit card. Can you share your thoughts on that, please?
Sure. I'm going to channel one of our co-authors who always, he is not of this industry. And so when us from inside the industry try and bring up some of what we think are unique or anomalistic type characteristics because of the industry we're in, he always elevates it to it's something simple. And so in the case of TVMs, TVMs are just another endpoint. Your network has dozens, probably hundreds, in some cases, thousands of endpoints around, whether physical or digital. And TVMs are just one of many. And so the network activity, all of the sort of technical characteristics and aspects of the communication between the TVM and the system, you know, the money flowing back and forth, all of that is information just flowing over the same pipes that emails flow over. And so treating it any differently is fairly unnecessary. That being said, it is financial information, so it does fall under PCI compliance stuff. So there is likely some existing compliance requirements. You may not even be aware, but the vendor, the builder of the TVM and or the software provider underneath it are likely PCI compliant. That is actually a requirement of the credit card companies. So even though they are fairly cash focused, because they more often than not also allow for credit card, that then ensures that in order for the credit card to be usable on that infrastructure, it would have to follow under PCI compliance. So there is some stuff there. That's kind of leads to another idea we've discovered. There's a lot there already among your organizations. You may not be aware of it. Your vendors may be just doing it and you're not aware. And I think that that's an important point. Again, going back to what Katie was saying, of relying on your supply chain, because they are already doing quite a bit. And it is not only great for you, but also important that you learn what they're doing, so that, again, it helps you learn and helps get more sophisticated for how you manage your posture.
Excellent. Thank you for that response. And just as we heard your dog bark, my dog is scratching at the door. So my apologies to everybody for any sounds you hear in my background. It's just the way of the world these days. Let's go right along to a question that was submitted in advance, which is, can you tell us more about cyber literacy and why it's important? How can transit agencies and professionals improve their cyber literacy?
I can jump in on that one.
Great.
So building on actually what Brandon just said, the cyber literacy in some respects is really important, because you do need to be having that conversation with your vendors. So for example, ask about the PCI compliance, but that will help in building your cyber literacy. But it's also the importance of being able to have an informed conversation so that you can tell if the answer you're getting from that vendor is maybe not where it needs to be, or if you want maybe a more mature response, or you expect a higher level of maturity in cyber risk management from your vendors. That cyber literacy on the part of you and your team needs to be there so that you have that gut check. And of course, there's some vendors that can help you with that. I'd say first and foremost, using some of your vendors as a resource for improving cyber literacy. But really, there's a lot of, and beyond the vendors, there's a lot of information that's out there that ranges from the more technical to really just diving in for someone who wants to start with, tell me again what cybersecurity is. I mean, really, it's not a bad idea to start from scratch and build up from there. There's so many rabbit holes to go down along the way. I would definitely, Brandon mentioned NIST earlier. There's resources available there. There's resources from DHS, certainly FTA, Brandon, APTA, yes.
MTI.
Yes, MTI.
The acronyms going, I love it.
So there's many. There's a lot of great books. If weeding through all of the details of kind of a more technical discussion of it isn't as helpful for you, I'd highly recommend. Feel free to reach out to us. I won't name the books here in this session, but there's a lot of really helpful books kind of putting in context the nature of the risk, and I'd say the broad nature across industries, and why this is so applicable to public transit. That might be a helpful primer for some people as well. But just know that this is something that the risk is out there. The challenge of integrating, of getting up to speed and getting up to speed quickly, asking the right questions. We're seeing it across industries. This is not unique to public transit. A lot of people are scrambling, both kind of personally and also in the professional realm. So just know that you're not alone, and there's a lot of great resources out there to pull on.
Well, Catherine, that robust response leads to a question from the moderator,
okay.
Which is there a plan to develop some at a glance checklist of resources or questions that would be useful for people to ask or consider, and for those who maybe don't have the time, the resources to take a deeper dive into the books and other different literature that's available?
Yeah, there is, and I see Brandon has that teed up, so I'm going to. We're definitely aiming to help with that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working on a project now, actually, under an FTA grant to build and develop a cybersecurity assessment tool to help guide small and medium-sized transit agencies to go through the process of understanding, and more importantly, assessing their current state, so that can then feed that life cycle, that program, so that they can figure out and prioritize the roadmap, if you will, for how to proceed, how to elevate their thing.
Brandon, I'm going to be shameless here for a minute since our grant manager is tuned in. But if I understand correctly, that work was predicated on the success of the first MTI published report. So this shows the return on investment and leveraging federal funds, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We've been on the phone. We've done this. We've had conversations with TSA, FEMA, FTA, all of the folks involved, including today with another subcommittee. So it's been a lot of fun, very interesting, but also, again, this is resonating. We definitely hit the mark early. We predated SolarWinds, but it's definitely becoming top of mind, I think, for a lot of folks.
I think so as well. And you're just underscoring the importance of aligning decisions and dollars with good research that helps support investment. So we have time now for one last question here, and it's a good one. Forgive any mispronunciations, but how will removing Huawei, the largest telecommunications product provider in the world and one of the largest chip manufacturers, impact supply chains and pricing?
I'll kick us off with that one too. So Huawei, yes. So Huawei is at the heart of a lot of conversations, anything from national security to supply chain discussions. I know we're coming up on time here, so I'll say read the Buy America piece. That'll help dive a little deeper into it. But my short answer is really there is a lot more attention being paid on the regulatory side of the house to making sure that critical infrastructure in the United States is not being through the supply chain process and the final product, that there aren't any actions happening along that supply chain process that would either over the course of that process or at the end point or any point in the future, put the customer, put the final user of that product, in this case, the transit agency, at risk and not just the physical risk, but I'd say increasingly so, knowing where the data generated by that product and the components of that product, where the data generated from that is going. And so we've seen instances where throughout the supply chain, you'll hear about backdoors being programmed in or built into different systems that oftentimes the end user isn't aware of, and so it allows someone to access the data that's going through that product. And so it's tied in with national security concerns. So really, the heart of your question is, I think the major thing people are concerned about is it going to make my price tag go up elsewhere? The short answer is quite possibly yes. But the good news is there's a lot of things that can be done to plan for that, to anticipate, to watch the regulatory landscape, and increasingly so, as Brandon alluded to a lot of the conversations that we're involved in, it's important that public transit agencies are speaking up and through APTA and others, and really conveying what their needs are, because that's part of the regulatory discussion. So you'll see at the end of our Buyer America report, we've got some recommendations in there of how to think about some of these challenges, how to consider some of today's reliance on a Chinese-based supply chain, and some considerations for what you might want to do going forward.
That's right. Now, Catherine and Brandon, I want to be respectful of our time frame here, but would you be willing to stay on a few extra minutes to answer additional questions?
Sure.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. So I'm going to officially close the webinar for those of you who need to go on to your next meetings. I want to thank you again for joining us and learning from our experts today, Brandon Thomas and Catherine Seckman. Please be sure to visit the MTI website to download the numerous publications that we've dropped into the chat feature so you can learn more about this critically important work. And for those interested in additional webinars, our next one will be hosted on November 16th at 10 a.m. And that will be Advanced Driver Assistance Systems and Automated Features. Are they driving us to safety? That will be very interesting, and I hope you tune in. So I wish you all a terrific day. And for those of you who can stay, we're going to have a few more questions here. Do you find that there is a large percentage of systems on the transit network that are vendor maintained or managed? And how do they handle change management?
So just to caveat, if you haven't recognized our level of technical acumen, we are much more on policy, business side of things. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Let's see, the question went away and I was, am I able? Oh, there it is.
Let's see, can I get it back?
I can see it. I've got
it.
Percentage of
Michael Slack.
Oh yeah, vendor yes. Actually, there are some agencies that are almost 100% vendor managed. So there's a lot of that going on. And managing change management. Again, I think, especially when you're going with vendors that cross-pollinate with other industries, that becomes, theoretically, they have more process and procedure there with regard to change management.
If it's a more highly regulated industry or one where that's built into their system, just as a caveat.
Definitely, yeah, very good, yeah. But at the end of the day, you're responsible. One of the recommendations we put in the first report was executive attestation. So having the CEO of the agency attest that they're doing meeting the minimum thresholds and so forth. And so even if it is vendor managed or self-managed, that attestation may come into play soon. Regardless, just in the interest of managing the organization, I think it's important that the executive team have visibility and understanding and controls and so forth to ensure that these things are managed correctly.
I think that's also important, looking at it a different way, Brandon, is what we've seen is that it's typically the person in the C-suite or the top position that may have their job in jeopardy when there is a cyber attack. And so having them attest to understanding what is in process is another line of defense in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I will say too, there's even if you're not in the C-suite, even if you don't have today a relationship with the senior executives in your organization, but you're doing security, knock on the door. I think these folks know that they need to be heard. They need to be sussing out this sort of counsel. And I think knock on the door. In the first report, we had one person who was using the audit team to insert and slide and push this stuff, which I thought was a pretty ingenious way to promote cybersecurity readiness within the organization in a way that the C-suite could then hear in a different voice.
But at the end of the day, the takeaway message is the C-suite needs to be aware of what's happening for the process to run as smoothly as it needs to, right? Not just be off in a corner somewhere. I remember years ago, the board. Can you say more about that, Catherine?
So, I mean, that is also part of, when we talk about the C-suite needing to be in the know, because as you pointed out, Karen, it's at the end of the day, whose job is going to be on the line if something happens, who's going to be called before a hearing, who's going to be held to account. It's most likely the CEO, but board members are part of that sort of conversation as well. And in terms of board member responsibility, board members need to be asking of the transit agency leadership and of, if you're part of a vendor board, any board really needs to be saying, hey, what are we doing with cybersecurity? What does that look like? What's our maturity level? What are we requiring of the third parties with whom we work? To gain a sense of where are we with this? And it's those questions can be asked by someone who does not have a technical background. It's certainly does not need to be solely the purview of someone who can sit with the IT team and dig through anything. A lot of this is about organizational management. It's about making sure that, again, enterprise risk management includes cybersecurity and is most certainly the purview of the C-suite and the board of directors to make sure that that organization can continue doing what it does best and delivering their service with quality and safely and
as little disruption as possible.
Little disruption as possible, exactly. Knowing that there are many people out there trying to disrupt, some of them for purpose of getting information, others just for kicks. So it's being prepared for that.
That's right. And that's a frightening landscape to think about all the bad actors out there. But let's move right along here. We've had an anonymous attendee say you talked about operation systems being brought more into the common office intranets. Any thoughts and or concerns about some agencies wanting to use Active Directory to share login for operation systems versus the common office applications? I'm going to leave that question there in case you need to read it again before responding.
Thank you. I now know where they are though. So anyway, so if I recall correctly, Active Directory is a Microsoft service that overlays their suite of applications. And my understanding of Microsoft is that they serve everyone, and therefore their cyber configuration, their tools and resources are quite extensive. One of the, again, we're getting a little to the edge of my skis here, but one of the key components of managing cyber risk is access control. So having complete oversight, visibility, and control over who has access to what their credentials are across your network. And if it's been a decade plus since I've played with Active Directory, but if I recall, it was intended to be sort of a overlaying tool to allow the team to effectively manage access control across the enterprise. And given how critical that is to ensuring and mitigating the risk, it is likely easier and better and more effective to manage it in Active Directory than it would be to have to manage it across the various applications. Inevitably, that across the applications would lead to error, configuration. You forget to delete that person that quit, that kind of thing. So having that overall enterprise view of your access, your system access is pretty important.
I just adopted something you said that I'm going to use for myself, which is instead of me saying I'm outside my area of expertise, I'm at the edge of my seat on this topic is what I think I heard you say. And that's very clever. So I've been at the edge of my seat this entire presentation because it's so far outside my field, but yet so important. So thank you for breaking down this in a way that's easily understood. One final thought, we have a viewer that would like to learn more about your assessment tool that you mentioned. Brandon, can you drop the research project description or some other information into the chat for this interested person?
Let's see, let me just give you, I don't think there's anything live on the internet right now. Max Cybersecurity is the prime on that one. And APTA is involved. You know, the FTA is involved, of course. So there will be quite a bit of part of our remit on that one is to evangelize the results, the resulting tool. So when that is completed, I expect probably Q1, Q2 next year. My assumption is if you've heard about this, you'll probably hear about that.
How about we just say we'll make sure of it?
And we can
watch this space. There's plenty more to come on that.
Well, fantastic. We've come to the end of our questions here. Any other thoughts you'd like to share before we? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you spell the name of the prime, please?
Yeah, I'm putting the website in the thing.
Perfect. It's into the chat now. Great. This has been really fun. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate you two dedicating your time this morning to helping us all have a better understanding of the risks and some of the mitigations that can be used. So thank you. And to anybody who's interested, reach out to us at any time. Both Brandon and Catherine have dropped their email addresses into chat. And of course, Irma or myself are always available to answer questions. So thank you so much. And don't forget to tune in on November 16th. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.